So I love to chat on a regular basis. I don't have kids in school anymore, but I do have a niece in college. Should I say in college or in indoctrination? I don't know, but she's at UCI. You say the rest. And I've got a grandson that's not ready for school yet. But it's incumbent on old people like me and you, if you're old, or those of you that have kids, to see, hey, what's going on in the schools. Well, we've got a watchdog with us, Mark Schneider, founder and president of Protect Our Kids. Welcome.
Thank you, Ron.
Can I use that term, watchdog?
Absolutely. That's what we do. Watchman on the wall.
Watchman on the wall. Okay. So explain a little bit about Protect Our Kids.
Well, we're an organization that started in 2019 as a response to a law that passed in California. I mean, you're comparing California to other states. California is 44 out of 50 states in academia. We're almost at the bottom of the barrel. The literacy rate in California today is lower than it was in 1840 before the imposition of the public school system. And
Wow.
California has been passing for about 20 years now a series of laws that are designed to indoctrinate children into a worldview that is completely foreign to the one the founders envisioned and that made America great. And it finally culminated in a law called AB 329, which is euphemistically known as the California Healthy Youth Act. It took effect in 2016. And the goal of the law is to sexualize our children, to start introducing radical sex ed as early as elementary school. Well, along with myself, some other concerned citizens said, we've got to do something about it. And that was the genesis of Protect Our Kids. And we're an organization geared to educate parents mainly about what's happening to their kids in the public school system.
Wow. It's a shame to hear and I spent Thanksgiving this year with two of my college aged family members. And it was just fascinating listening to me, listening to them and their thought process. And they're both very, very, both way smarter than me. But I listened to some of the things that they're coming out with, and it's scary.
It is scary. I mean, in 1987, Alan Bloom, famous professor of the University of Chicago, wrote a book called The Closing of the American Mind. Now, this is like 34 years ago. And in the opening pages of the book, Ron, he makes this statement: almost every freshman believes or says he believes that truth is relative. So those people that came out of the system that inculcated that worldview are now in positions of power in government and local culture, and we wonder what's happened to this country. And since then, it's just gotten much, much worse.
I hear that. I'm a fan of Bill O'Reilly, and I listen to his podcast regularly, and he says he mentions a lot of times people that have the comment my truth. Well, what is my truth? Right. It is either the truth or it's not the truth.
That's right.
It's not my truth.
Yeah.
Right. How do you come up with that kind of a thought?
Or even worse yet, they'll say there is no absolute truth, of which begs the question: is that absolutely true? It's a self-refuting statement.
Exactly. So what are you seeing now? I mean, you've been coming on the broadcast for about a year almost, give or take, and are you getting a foothold at all?
We're starting to. Parents, fortunately, in large part because of the lockdown, got to see what their kids were learning by looking over their
shoulders. You started in 2019?
2019, March of 2019. Got to see what their kids were learning by looking over their shoulders as they were on Zoom classes during the shutdown. And what they saw shocked them, which started sort of a parent revolt, starting in Loudoun-Cowden, Virginia, and working its way all the way to California, which means more and more parents are now cognizant of what their kids are being taught, and they're starting to get involved. So that's good news. But Ron, we've got a long, long way to go.
So I guess in for your watchdog organization, the pandemic was probably good.
Yeah, in a sense, it was good because parents became informed, and that's always a good thing. Information is power.
So, is there a way? What is the focus right now? What is the main thing that you're trying to that we can make changes? I think you mentioned school boards, do school boards have any authority?
School boards have tremendous authority.
Really?
So
Okay.
yeah, state boards of education, they have money to spend, they can influence, but the real power happens in the local school district, which is managed by the local school board. So if you want to see big changes in American education, that is the place to get involved.
So I went and got involved probably 4 or 5 years ago. There was a recall movement and in the Orange Unified School District.
Yeah.
And I went down and I was watching, that's because a radio host and consumer advocate, watching what's going on there. And I can't count how many times they said, well, we don't have any authority. The state tells us everything we have to do.
Yeah, well, that's not really true.
Okay.
I mean, the state does pass laws, which the school boards are required by law to implement, but the way they implement it, they have tremendous power. So, for example, AB 329 requires that radical sex ed be taught, but there are all kinds of different curriculums out there, and the school board can choose which curriculum that they can use.
Okay, so that's the way
they
do
should
it.
choose the least offensive one.
So
that's just one example.
And ironically enough, I mean, I look at it and say, let's see, we're going to teach radical sex ed at the expense of not teaching the Constitution or I mean, it just baffles me because I know I looked at talking again to some of my family members and they're almost don't understand how laws are made, but they're getting this kind of sex education stuff.
Civics education in America is a lost art. I remember, maybe you're old enough to remember, Ron, you could not pass the 8th grade in America unless you passed a year-long course in the Constitution.
Right.
Most kids have no idea what is in our Constitution, how our government works, how laws are passed. No conception whatsoever.
I remember we used to watch that that little commercial about the guy with the bill becomes a law. Do you remember that commercial?
Yes, I do.
Long time ago. Continuing our conversation, chatting with Mark Schneider this morning. Protect our kids. So, Mark, I was listening to one of the business channels this morning, and I guess there's 2 or 3 different people in Congress. I think 1 senator and 2 representatives are looking at getting rid of TikTok because they're saying Big Brother's watching. And I see in the notes we have for today, Big Brother's watching.
Big Brother is watching.
They were talking about China, but are you talking about China?
No, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about right here in America. It's a fact of life. George Orwell, the famous novelist and British literary critic, wrote his famous book 1984. It was published in 1949. And he paints this picture of a dystopian future some 30 years after this nuclear war. And this is where the idea of Big Brother comes from, this intrusive government orchestra that's controlling every aspect of society, including the truth that people learn. And we're seeing that in today's society, and particularly in the school system.
It's amazing how, what you said it was written in
1949 is when it was published. So it was written during World War II.
Wow. And he had the foresight to know what we're going to be going through today.
It really did.
Yeah, so much
scary,
of that,
actually.
I think when I was in school, I think it was mandatory reading.
Not anymore.
They don't want anybody to know what, to think for themselves or it's all about government. Government knows best on everything.
In fact, the California Department of Education's recommended literature list doesn't have Shakespeare, Aristotle, Plato, Chaucer, any of the writers who we would have in other ages classified as being the classic writers, things that every American should know. In fact, for 9th to 12th graders, there's no book on that list written before 2016. What does that tell you?
Wow.
Including George Orwell, Ron. He's not on the list either. So you're right. Kids are not learning this.
So if there's nothing written before 2016, that means we're really destined to repeat a lot of mistakes that we learned in the past.
There's no question about it.
That was a comment I had with one of my relatives over Thanksgiving, was he said, well, our generation, we want to vote for what we want. And I said, that's great. But where are you going to learn about what the mistakes that my generation and prior generations made?
That's right.
Right. You know what you want from a perfect society.
Those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it.
Right.
And we're going to see that if things keep going the way they are in our country.
It's a shame that that's happening, and it's, we have no, again, in especially in our society. And I know that, China. I couldn't do a radio show like this in China. I'd probably last about 30 seconds. But it's a shame that we're voting for these same people over and over again.
Well, that's the sad truth of it. Not only are we voting these people over and over again, but like-minded conservatives and people of faith, unfortunately, Ron, they're not voting. During the recall election, Governor Newsom won by 65%. In this last election, couple of million conservatives just stayed home and didn't vote at the polls, and we wonder why bad things are happening in our state and country.
Well, I'm gonna say it because so many won't. Conservatives are stupid in many instances, and I am one, right? So what do we? And I was just listening to this recently. When you look and see, in the Georgia runoff, so conservatives and evangelicals said Herschel Walker's not perfect, so I'm going to stay home. Exactly what you said, as opposed to saying, okay, we don't have the greatest candidate, but what's our alternative?
That's right.
Right. I mean, instead of going out there and I just saw the same thing at the Chapman University, they were trying to figure out why their model was off so much on the House of Representatives forecast. And the same thing was the case, is that conservatives, Republicans basically say, if my candidate isn't going to be the finalist, I'm not going to vote. So guess what? We get even worse.
Yeah, I mean, there's this old statistics that Barna puts out. So conservatives and evangelicals in particular, only half of them are registered to vote in any particular election cycle, and only half of them actually go to the polls when it's time to vote, which means only 25% of the conservative voice is actually making their voice heard at the ballot box. And they ask themselves, why is our country in the shape it is? They're not making their voices heard.
Who was? I don't remember which one of the politicians that made the comment, vote for the best electable conservative, right? I mean, that's, you look at it and you see, why is it that Kristen Sinema is leaving the Democrat Party? Why is it Joe Manchin just said, I'm not leaving, but I'm not sure I'm going to stay either.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. I mean, you look at some of these things and you wonder why. What can we do?
Well, the first thing to do is to get involved. If people and to be informed, and that's what we try to do at Protect Our Kids. The website is protectourkidsnow.org. And so what we try to do is just make parents aware of what their kids are actually learning in the public school system. And once they learn it, it's like the scales come off their eyes and they become livid. It's not just sex and gender theory, Ron. It's critical race theory and replacement parenting in the form of social and emotional learning. And it is literally indoctrinating children into an Orwellian worldview. Kids learn to hate America. They're not learning phonics, arithmetic, reading skills. They're basically illiterate by the time they come out of a high school education. And they're learning to despise the very country that has given them the rewards that they have.
It fascinates me listening to some young people when we're talking. I think if I took out, I was listening to an interview. Actually, it was one of the Chargers players, I think yesterday, doing a great thing, right? They were giving, I think that player, the Chargers gave out bikes to everybody in a school, and the Rams players went shopping with some kids, and they're interviewing one of the players, and I think every third word was man, right? I mean, yes, man, and this man and that man. If you take the word man out of their vocabulary, take the word like out of the vocabulary, right? They wouldn't be able to say anything. Public speaking, communications.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And that's who our kids are looking up to.
That's right.
They need to be looking up to mom and dad.
Well, which what George Orwell pointed out in his book. He says part of the party's platform is to confuse and to seep the populace into entertainment. And our society is seeped in it. When kids aren't at school, what are they doing? They're playing video games. They're looking at YouTube videos, and most of it is not worth watching. It's actually destructive. Yeah,
and they start getting to the point that you can't do anything because you're geared in 20-second sound bites or watching something. Read a book, right? Oh, heaven forbid. Continuing our conversation this morning, chatting with Mark Schneider. Protect Our Kids. ProtectOurKidsNow.org is the website. So, Mark, I saw in the notes here something that I've been getting myself in a lot of trouble with for the last 3 years, because I can't spell science. I did have to take a couple science classes in college and in high school and whatnot, but science is not my forte. But I'm pretty good at questioning things. And during the pandemic, we were basically told, don't question doctors, who I think is a science. Doctors take a lot of science classes. I mean, I couldn't handle all of those things. But, it got to be the point where you can't question them. Do you see that changing ever?
Well, if it is going to change, it can only be changed by people that learn critical thinking skills. And we are not teaching that in public school today. In fact, one of the main themes of Orwell's book is the thought police. We are going to impose this orthodoxy, this certain way of thinking, and you will not depart from it. And Ron, unfortunately, we're seeing that in today's school system. The National Educators Association, the American Federation of Teachers, the California Teachers Union, school administrators are all homogeneous in their thinking about this woke orthodoxy that is being taught in our school system. And if you depart from it, you risk being canceled. So, for example, if a teacher decides not to get implied bias training, or if they refuse to go along with a preferred pronoun of one of their children in class, they can actually be terminated. It's happening across the country.
Wow.
So that does not bode well for children learning critical thinking skills.
Kind of seems like it would be contradictory, so that the unions obviously are buying into this, but they're certainly not protecting the teachers if the teacher doesn't buy in. So isn't the union supposed to protect the members?
Only if they identify with the right worldview, which is for all intents and purposes wokeism. If they don't identify with it, then they're not welcome in the teachers' unions. They're welcome to pay their dues, but not to make their voice heard.
Do you think we'll get to the point in maybe some of the American states, not California, where we may get to have school choice?
Well, that's the holy grail of ending the public school monopoly. And unfortunately, we didn't get enough signatures on the ballot here in California to make it happen in this last election cycle. But look for it in 2024. It is happening in other states across the country. Arizona last year just passed an educational savings account law, which is going to free parents up. Imagine that. Taking your taxpayer dollars, which are earmarked for education, which in California is about $17,000 per student per year.
Wow.
If you could have that money and open up the free marketplace of education and decide where you're going to send your child for school, that would be a very good thing.
Now, the free market, California, we're not going to get that because the school unions spend way too much money on politics.
They would spend probably over $100 million easily to defeat an educational savings account bill in California. But if it was an initiative statute and enough people got behind it, it's common sense, Ron, and it's hard to argue against it. So
and the biggest
this
one
is an idea whose time has come.
And the irony is the one that really gets hurt the most by it is by the working class individuals.
Of course.
Right? I mean, I sent 2 of my 3 kids went to private school.
Right.
Right. And one of them went to private college. 2 of them are not college material, which is great too. But the bottom line is I am fortunate enough to be able to send my kids to get a education. And think about this, a Jewish guy sending his kids to a Lutheran school.
Yeah.
Right. Because I felt that was a better education or educational environment. So it's, you look at it, they say, okay, what about the people that can't afford that? And now we won't let the state help them.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, education in America used to be all privatized. All our major Ivy League universities were all private institutions when they started. Many of them still are, but this state orchestrated education system is a phenomenon that started happening in the late 1800s and really took off by progressives in the 1900s. And it's been with us ever since.
Well, I noticed yesterday when I was listening to the Chapman University forecast, I heard a new term in their forecast that they're proud of their inclusivity.
Inclusivity. So this is part of the Orwellian newspeak, the actually changing of the meaning of words and phrases. There's our diversity, equity, and inclusion departments in virtually every major school system and corporate campus in the country. What is diversity? Well, we knew what it used to be. Today, it's either advancing or hindering people based purely on the pigment of their skin. Inclusion is celebrating what used to be called moral depravity, bringing people of all sexual persuasions into the marketplace. Equity is now defined as giving people what they haven't earned.
That's a shame.
It is a shame.
Because the whole idea is let me work harder. And I don't know if I shared this with you once before, Mark. I used to have a warehouse. I had 50 some people that worked for me. And I had one gentleman that we wanted to promote. And we did promote him, and he was miserable. Totally miserable. So we said, well, do you want to go back to what you were doing before? He says, can I? Which is great because he was able to do what he was happy doing. We were trying to push our goals and desires of growing and wanting more on somebody that wasn't their pleasure.
Right.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
I mean, shouldn't we have that opportunity to, let everybody get educated, but then make your own decision?
And private schooling, and particularly homeschooling, allows for that kind of a specialization for your particular child. If you have a special needs child or someone who has an affinity for art, and not necessarily science-based, rather than force fit them into this protocol that the public schools try to do, a private school or a homeschooling environment allows you to specialize.
And I'm seeing more and more people, and I don't know whether it's because of financial or what the issue is. I'm seeing more and more homeschool because parents say, well, I can't afford to send them or don't choose to send them to a private school. And I certainly don't want them to be in public school.
That's some good news that's happened out of the COVID experience. In California, there are roughly 6.2 million children in the public school system. Over the last 2 years, over 300,000 of them have left the public schools for a homeschooling environment, which is a very positive occurrence.
Well, at least mom and dad will then know exactly what they're being taught.
That's right.
Great information. If you want more information on Protect Our Kids, the organization, the website is protectourkidsnow.org. Protectourkidsnow.org. Get more information on the organization. Get more information on what your kids are being taught, maybe what your grandkids are being taught, and make your voice heard, not in a disruptive way like they're doing in LA City Council, but go and vote. Vote for the measures and the people that are going to represent you the way you want to be. If you stay home, don't complain. That's just my personal opinion.